I want to talk about Josh O'Connor. I've been wanting to talk about Josh O'Connor for months now because I've just been overwhelmed with how good he looks in clothes in his movies. I saw him in Challengers, The Mastermind, La Chimera. There are other roles that he's been in, Emma as well, though I don't think his role in Emma was so specifically charming. But he has been outrageously successful as an actor and also recently as a sort of fashion it boy. So I was looking into him, and I think the thing that actually surprised me is I don't like his red carpet fashion. I was thinking, wow, Josh O'Connor, he must just look good in clothes because when I see him on screen, everything he wears just sort of like falls off of him. And he's rather tall. He's like 6'1", he's a skinny white guy. And I was like, oh, he just makes everything look good. And then I saw some outfits outside of the movies, and I thought, actually, I don't like that nearly as much. And this discrepancy really, really interests me. So I've done a little bit of a deep dive into his experience with being dressed for movies, the wardrobe stylist, and also as a celebrity being styled for the red carpet. And I want to talk about why I think there is such a big difference between how he looks in movies and how he looks in real life. Also, not everyone agrees with me on this point. His personal or red carpet style has been very much hyped up by the media. You can find lots of publications, fashion publications, talking about how to shop his look and how wonderful his outfits have been. But either way, he's being styled, right? He has a stylist, a very well-known one, Harry Lambert. And in the movies, he is being wardrobe design. There's a costume designer that decides what he's going to wear. Now, each of these stylists have very different goals in mind, right? His red carpet stylist is probably trying to work with him to help him express his individuality, his personal taste in that setting, while a costume designer is working with him and the other creative members of a film team on how to build out the story that the movie is telling. The thing I've been wondering is, for a celebrity, is a public appearance also not just some type of performance, right? You're probably not being totally yourself. And I feel like the way Josh shows up in public on the red carpet, in interviews, he's very cute, he's very nice, he's smiley, he's a little geeky. And I think ultimately that when we get these still images, the thing that I think typically reads the best is a little bit of a confident nonchalance or even more of a flamboyance. And I'm thinking about people who like really show up and show out on the red carpet recently in terms of male celebrities. Coleman Domingo probably comes to mind. And he is just like, he's a little bit more of a peacocker, right? He knows how to wear clothes and he knows how to show up in them. I don't think that I want Josh to like pretend to be someone else for his red carpet looks, but it's possible that it just comes down to the posing, or does it come down to being yourself versus being a character, or does it come down to photography versus moving image? I think there are a lot of different things that it could be. So the first thing I want to dig into is how he photographs, how he looks in editorial campaigns versus public appearances. And thankfully, we have a lot of examples because he has been in Loewe campaigns since 2017. Jonathan Anderson, who was the creative director of Loewe at that time, saw him in God's Own Country, which I actually haven't seen, but it's on my list. And he loved it. He said, "I saw the film and remember coming out of the cinema feeling incredibly affected. I thought that Josh's performance had a genuine strength, which feels very pure. As soon as we were thinking about a face for Loewe's men's, Josh was someone who came straight to the front of my mind." There are lots of different options here, and I do think he has a fairly high fashion look because of his great facial shape and those ears. I really think that ears that stick out are very high fashion. I think most people would agree. And in some of them, he's giving young, it's giving fresh-faced and goofy, and some of them are a little bit more sultry, especially when he grows out his beard. I certainly like the images well enough. I have to say nothing compares to Daniel Craig for Loewe. Even like Greta Lee has done a bunch of Loewe campaigns, which I think are perfectly fine, but no one was giving like Daniel Craig was, and it's really, really hard to top the amount of personality he had in those shots. Like, no offense, but I just think Greta Lee and Josh O'Connor, they're giving model face. It's a lot of like, and Daniel Craig, I don't know if it's just because we're so used to seeing him as Bond, so for him to come out and do Benoit Blanc and to do these Loewe posters, just the reversal of expectations, a little bit campy, a little bit over the top. Not that James Bond is not over the top, but that element of surprise, I think, was just super, super effective. I do like the cover photo that he did for Esquire Spain, but overall, I'm wondering if they had given him like a character blurb or a sketch or something. They were like, this is who you are. Okay, now we're going to do the shoot. If it would have been totally different. I personally have only been photographed once or twice in my life, but I find it much easier to be photographed, and I find it much more comfortable if I am given like a specific emotion and not just like look cool and hot. I think actually the same goes for public appearances. I've been photographed at parties before, and you're just supposed to look like, oh, it's natural that I'm taking time out of my conversation to like stand and look at the camera and be natural. Like I think actually natural and also hot and cool are the hardest things to do in a photograph. Though I do think once you lock in, like once you get your pose, and you'll see sometimes celebrities give each other red carpet pose tips and tricks. And I think once they find the ones they like, they really just use them over and over again. I think once you lock it down, it's a little bit easier and you don't think about it that much. But overall, I find it much more fun to sort of, give a performance for photography rather than be a little dispossessed. Now, before we move on, I want to talk about the sponsor for this video. It is Unbound Merino. I got 3 long sleeve shirts from them. I'm wearing this one here, and I got 2 others, one in black and one in gray. I was really actually excited for them to send these to me because I have just been wearing white t-shirts under my sweaters, and I always wear an undershirt. I never ever wear a sweater without an undershirt. I've had arguments with my friends about this. To me, there's something bizarre about it. Also, you don't want to really get sweaty in your sweaters because a lot of them are delicate wash, and the more you wash them, the more they get pilled. Anyway, I'm a big fan of an undershirt, especially in the winter, and I run cold. So to have a beautifully delicate, thin merino underlayer to be able to put under everything else that I'm wearing for the next 3 months is ideal. Because they're a natural fiber, they are odor resistant as opposed to something made out of polyester, which usually gets smelly, especially if you're cold sweating in them, which is what I call when you're cold and bundled up and also sweating. And they are moisture wicking and breathable. I know it's a very hot topic right now, and I've talked about it in other videos, but natural fibers are really good for breathability and temperature regulation. I'm also really looking forward to packing these on my trip to Paris in January this year. I've been to Paris in January so many times in my life because my godmother lives there. I have a place to stay, and my mom usually goes to her work for this trade show. And Paris in January, listen, it's cold. It's really cold. It's not that different from New York City, and you're out way more because you're not home working. You're being a tourist. So you need to be wearing layers, and these are so nice and light and easy to pack. So I think they came to me at the perfect time. If you guys are interested in layering up with Unbound Merino, I will leave all the information in the description box below. Now back to Josh O'Connor. I can't believe I haven't said this yet, but he is an amazing actor. I feel like it maybe didn't even need to be said, but maybe part of the reason I like how he wears clothes in movies is because he's just such a good actor. Anyway, his stylist for red carpet for public appearances is Harry Lambert, whose work you probably are familiar with because he famously worked with Harry Styles in a very gender-bending way, and that does seem to be part of his focus. He's also worked with Emma Corrin and most recently Alexander Skarsgård, who has been showing up in very fun, provocative outfits. And so in that thread, it seems that O'Connor and Lambert have been trying to find ways to subvert the usual suit and tie look that we see on Hollywood men over and over again. Lambert said, "What I love about Josh is he does want to dress up. He loves fashion in his own way, he wants to have fun, and is willing to try things. We just wanted something very easy, very him, and very joyful and chic." These are about his outfits for the 2025 Cannes Film Festival. He said, "Me and Josh looked through the last Prada show and exchanged some images of runway looks that we loved, and we started building out a mood board with references and ideas. We wanted to do a mix and match tailoring for Cannes. We loved the green floral t-shirt. It was very easy and slick, but a little fun. It felt very Josh. Josh is a fan of nature. We love a little flower. He really loved the trainers too." I do think that after Jonathan Anderson left Loewe, which I assume Josh O'Connor was wearing a lot of at that time, he did seem to move on to Prada for a while, and now he is doing Jonathan Anderson Dior. Did I love his look featuring Jonathan Anderson Dior at the Wake Up Dead Man, a Knives Out mystery premiere in Toronto? No, not really. I have to say a lot of this is something I noticed. I feel like I don't love the way his pants have been tailored in a lot of these public appearances. I don't know why, if they're too short or they're too slim or something in between. But I just feel like they're a little awkward the way they hit or don't hit the shoe that he's wearing. But like, again, no offense, maybe it's just this picture. He looks sort of awkward and uncomfortable in this picture. And a lot of making an outfit looks good is like how you feel in it or how you make people think you feel in it. And maybe he wasn't feeling it and so wasn't selling the garment. Like that's the point of a model, right? Is to sell the garment. And he's not necessarily selling it. which is not also his job. His job is to, well, it is sort of his job if they're giving it to him for free. We can get into like why celebrities get to wear designer clothes another time. I haven't found that many examples of his actual everyday street style, you know, like him getting in and out of a cab or taking his dog for a walk. I don't know if he has a dog, but just giving examples. I haven't really seen much of that around, so I don't know that much about his really individualistic personal style that he creates himself. But I did find in this article, in this interview with him and Paul Mescal, because they made this movie, which I haven't seen, I'm sorry, The History of Sound, though I did like the look of the wardrobe styling from the images I saw. They said, Paul Mescal says about Josh dresses very well on his own. He wears clothes very well. He's got a great frame for clothes, long and elegant. And Josh says, such a good description of me. Long, it's so different than tall, which that's also what initially made me think that he looked good in clothes, is because he is long. And then it turns out I don't think he always looks good in clothes. So let's get into the movies, because I have a couple of theories that I dismissed for one reason or another based on my personal style preferences. Like, do I love when Josh O'Connor wears a vintage suit? Yes, because I love vintage suiting. So I was worried that it was just a personal, you know, I like this and I don't like this, and it's my personal feelings about the style themselves just imposed onto his life. But did he look good in Challengers when he was just wearing a sporty tennis outfit? Yes, I think so. And a lot of people agreed, especially because the costume designer for Challengers was Jonathan Anderson. Jonathan Anderson must work constantly. It says he built every element of the character's wardrobes, mixing off the rack and custom pieces. And they are sort of styled in a way that makes it look like they own these clothes, right? And that they have owned these clothes forever. I find that makes a big difference in movies when things look like costumes that are being worn for the first time versus clothing that looks like they've owned for 10 to 15 years. Especially for Josh O'Connor's character in that movie, if you haven't seen it, he plays a sort of down on his luck tennis pro. And so the sort of rumpled look of his clothes is in direct contrast to Zendaya's character or Mike Faith's character. My favorite quote about this movie is from Vogue writer Jose Corrales Unzueta. He said, "You can tell he smells." And there is something just so appealing about that. And the style of Challengers definitely played a part in its reception and its marketing. There's this article from GQ about this Impado vest, as they call it. I think they're British, I guess. I would call it a tank top. And just the plaid shorts he's wearing, like, it's such a random outfit. And it's random because, like I said, he's like living out of his car in this movie. But that is the appeal, and so classic that, you know, you see something that is meant to be off the cuff and then people are trying to commodify it and buy it for themselves, which that's life. No qualms there. But there were also some more manufactured moments, like the I Told Ya t-shirt, which it's great. It's iconic. He wore it on the red carpet. That looked pretty good, I thought. But again, it's possible that I like this outfit because the shot that I've seen him in is sort of in media res. He's sort of in movement, showing off the shirt and smiling, and he looks very happy and natural. The marketing circus for Challengers also gave me maybe one of his favorite outfits and one of my least favorite. I love this sweater and leather pants look, which I think he wore leather pants in that Loewe campaign that also I liked, so maybe I just think they're nice on him. But again, it could be the pose. He's giving this sort of downward sultry glare, and he has his hand out and his other hand in his pocket, which is nice because he has a railing behind him. He's not always going to have a railing behind him, so he's got to figure something else out. And this is something I always say to people when sometimes I work with people, like, to help with their personal styling, and they'll show me a bunch of inspiration images, and I'll always go through it with them and say, specifically tell me what you like about this image. You like the vibe, yes, but go through. You like the way they're wearing the hat. You like this color that they're wearing. You like the way the pants fit the shoes. Half the time, you might just like it because the person is hot and they're posed well, or the photograph itself is nice. It's well framed and it's well proportioned, you know, which the outfit does have a lot to do with that. But I always think it's important to sort of try to separate those things, though it's really, truly hard, because one of my least favorite outfits from this marketing, from the Challengers publicity tour, is this striped suit with the long green sleeves, like mint green. Could be that this photograph is bad and his collar is messed up and he's just like not really doing much with his body or his arms. Maybe if I saw him walk by in this, I'd be like, hot, chic, cool. I was surprised that people loved this look, because to me, if like this is the picture I saw, I'd be like, it looks weird, it looks awkward. I don't like that you can't see his hands at all. I do long sleeves sometimes. Like I have French cuff button downs and I don't button them sometimes, and I let them long, and sort of, yeah, it is dramatic and it is fun to do something like that, to be unexpected and play with that shape and that proportion. But in this picture, I'm sorry, it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. And I've never felt that way about him in a movie ever. So, and I like suits. I always like suits. So now let's move on to 2025. Huge year for Josh O'Connor. He is working. He is booked and busy. I watched The Mastermind, directed by Kelly Reichardt. I did not like the movie. I also saw her film Showing Up with Michelle Williams. I think she's just not to my taste. I don't want to get too much into my film criticism here. Not what the channel is about, but I don't think like breaking expectations and making something different than what you thought it was going to be is enough to make a point. A brief plot overview is that it centers on Josh O'Connor's character, who is a father, a husband, and unemployed. He essentially decides to perform a heist at his local art museum to steal paintings and then resell them to make money. It goes horribly awry very quickly, and then he's essentially on the run. So, you know, he definitely has started to become not typecast, but he's playing a lot of dirtbags. You know, we had the Patrick Zweig dirtbag in Challengers, and now we have him in The Mastermind. You would think that, I mean, at this point, the articles you read about Josh O'Connor's style, like it does feel like glazing. You know, people are obsessed with the scene where he wears like a sweater and boxers to go get the newspaper. Is that really the height of fashion? I'm not sure. But on the other hand, I get it, because he looks good in everything they put him in. Everything is sort of, it's not evocative. I don't know. It's just like, it brings you in, and it's just so hard to say whether what's bringing you in is his I mean, obviously it's his performance, but the clothes in these movies, they're like mouth-watering, and the way he wears them in these movies, it is very alluring. The movie was costume designed by Amy Roth. She sourced as many vintage pieces as she could. The movie is set in 1970. And she said, Josh is one of those actors that brings a little magic to it. So you can almost put anything on him and it works. Girl, I agree. So they go for this sort of mellow autumnal palette, especially at the beginning, fuzzy ensembles, sort of Ivy League, a little preppy. And then finally, he gets to wear a suit, which is, you know, my mouth waters for Josh O'Connor in a vintage suit. And they call it an ill-fitting gray suit. It's sort of about his character becoming his father. And yeah, do I even think it's that ill-fitting? I don't know. I do think, like, classically, even though a lot of these things are sourced, like they said, something I love about costume design in movies, and it's almost like fashion history compounded, is looking at a period film and then the period that the period film was made in. So you can look up, people have talked about this before, but you can look up, like, okay, movies that are made about the medieval period, how they thought about the medieval period style and how they portrayed it in the 90s and the 2000s and the 2010s, how each decade puts their own spin on what they think the medieval period would look like, partially because they're appealing to modern audiences and what modern audiences like. And I do think that even though they are using original vintage clothing in a lot of these scenes in a lot of these movies, I still think they're probably choosing silhouettes and shapes that appeal to a modern audience. Whereas, you know, she says it's an ill-fitting suit and something in the 70s would probably be a lot tighter, though if he's wearing a suit that his dad would wear, then it may be the 50s, or a suit that's inspired by the 50s. I think that really appeals to a modern audience because it's generally oversized and baggy. So though it might be considered ill-fitting, it also aligns with what we like and what we're looking for in suits right now. But the height of Josh O'Connor wears good clothes in movies has to be La Chimera, which is a movie I adored. I highly, highly suggest it. It was directed by Alice Rohrwacher, and the costume design was done by Loredana Buscemi. In La Chimera, Josh O'Connor is playing this character named Arthur. He's an English grave robber in 1980s Tuscany. And sort of similarly, I mean, they're not heists, but they're grave robbing. So he's knocking around with this sort of ragtag group of Italian, what they call tombaroli or grave robbers, as they try to make money from it. And it is one of my favorite movies that I watched this year, even though it came out in 2023. The director said she was originally looking for an older actor, but Josh directly wrote her a letter and asked to meet up because he really liked her 2018 film Happy as Lazaro. She said, "When we met, I had this evident feeling that even though he was a young man, there was something very old inside him. He had a sensitivity and generosity, but also a melancholy of an older person. I then rewrote the script, imagining a man perhaps inspired by the young romantics in the 19th century, who would come to Italy because they were passionate about the ruins, the so-called Grand Tour." The costume designer, Loredana, does something very smart I always appreciate when they take this into consideration. She's from the countryside herself, and she said she wanted to create this very specific provincial town feel where people are wearing older clothes. Just because the movie is set in the 80s doesn't mean all the clothing is from the 80s. People in the 80s were wearing a lot of clothing from the 70s and maybe even the 60s. So she tries to make the clothing look as if it is up to 10 to 15 years old. They said, "We try to work on that fine line between realism and fairy tales, so the costumes also have a deeper symbolic meaning. Arthur, Josh O'Connor's character, has this white suit that he wears throughout the seasons because he may be a ghost. He may or may not exist." That's not necessarily a spoiler, but the idea of this white suit, especially because I think the movie begins in the fall or the winter and goes through the colder months, and he's wearing this like light, almost summer suit. So it really emphasizes that he's out of time and out of place. I love that suit. I love that freaking suit. So apparently this is what Loredana says. "Finding that suit was a magical experience. I'm always looking for authentic clothing and materials, finding myself in really weird places, and I saw this suit that was going to be destroyed, full of holes in a really bad state. My assistant said, 'That's disgusting. It's dead. You can't take it.' And I was like, 'No, I want it.' I didn't know why, but I got it fixed and washed." Of course, they had to replicate it. In movies, when they make a costume, they make multiple versions of it so that they have, a fresher version and a dirtier version, and they don't have to get it laundered and it doesn't change too much, for continuity. So, of course, they had to replicate it, and that was complicated because it was such a beautiful textile made in another time. Contemporary textiles are much uglier. I agree. Anyway, I loved the suit. I loved the movie. I really do highly suggest you watch it. I also liked this GQ article talking about the styling, and it said, "Perhaps La Chimera's closest style forebear is 1973's The Long Goodbye," which I haven't seen, but I'll put it on the list, in which a young Elliot Gould wanders across Southern California, blasting cig after cig in a disheveled black suit and well-worn JCPenney necktie. Both The Long Goodbye and La Chimera feature scenes of their off-kilter protagonists wearing suits at the beach. A good reminder that there's no need to be precious about your tailoring. It's far cooler, in fact, to really live in your suits and wear them wherever you go. Finally, do we need to talk about Wake Up Dead Man, a Knives Out mystery? He's a priest. He's just wearing like a priest's, it's not a habit, I guess, a priest outfit the entire time. Does he make it look good? Yeah, but there's a lot of people who think that the priest outfit is kind of hot, if you didn't know. So, his sort of crumpled, he's not really a dirtbag. I guess in that movie, he's supposed to be a reformed dirtbag, but there's certainly a little bit of that, devil may care bad boy energy. So where does this leave us? I fear subjectively that I like him in clothes where he's a little dirty, he's a little sweaty, he's a little messed up, he's down on his luck. And we are obviously talking specifically about Josh O'Connor and the way he wears clothes in movies and without. But I don't know, maybe that does have something to do with a broader sense about how we wear clothes and how appealing I find it, at least for clothes to look lived in, for clothes to look like they've been through something with you. And we almost never see that, obviously, on the red carpet, right? It's all polish and glitz and glam, and a lot of people pull that off. Like I said, you have to come in with an overconfidence, maybe, and a flamboyance, or a too cool for school, potentially, though, to pull that off. I think it's tough to show up on the red carpet in something that looks brand spanking new and smile your cute, goofy smile and really, sell the outfit. But you take this man and you give him a sad backstory and you tell him to go roll around in the dirt and the clothes look amazing. Or maybe he's bad at posing and he'll get better. And, 5 years from now, I'm going to be like, he looks great on the red carpet just because he figured out how to put his hand on his hip and cock his leg a little bit. Many things can be true, but Ultimately, this is an ode to Josh O'Connor wearing clothes in movies. Thank you to all the costume designers. Thank you to his stylist. You're doing amazing work.